The great hall of Crosspack Manor had never been so silent. Hundreds of pack members stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the high wooden beams, waiting for the moment they had gathered to witness. At the center of the room stood Elena Voss, dressed in a simple ivory gown, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Across from her stood Alpha King Damien Cross, tall and commanding, his dark eyes unreadable in the candlelight. For 3 years, Elena had waited for this night. Since the day her wolf had first sensed the bond between them, she had trained, studied, and prepared herself to stand beside a king. She had believed, with everything in her, that when the moment came, he would embrace her as his equal. But as the ceremonial drums began, and the pack elders called for the bond marking to begin, Damien did not move forward. He stood still, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the crowd instead of meeting hers. "I cannot do this," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elena felt her heart drop. "Damien," she started, but he shook his head. "You are not strong enough to stand beside a king," he said, his tone flat, almost apologetic, as if the words cost him nothing. "My wolf will not accept a weak mate. I reject you, Elena Voss." The words landed like a blow. A wave of murmurs swept through the hall. Elena felt every eye on her, felt the humiliation burn through her chest like fire. She had given him 3 years of devotion, 3 years of hope, and he had ended it in front of everyone who mattered. She did not cry. She did not beg. She simply turned, walked out of the hall with her head held high, and disappeared into the night. By morning, Elena Voss was gone. No scent trail, no trace, nothing the trackers could follow. It was as though she had vanished from the earth itself. What none of them knew, not Damien, not the elders, not even Elena herself until that night, was that her bloodline carried a secret far older than the Crosspack's throne. Her grandmother, long thought to be an ordinary Omega, had in truth descended from a line of sovereign alphas, wolves whose power did not simply lead a single pack, but could call to every alpha bloodline across the land. That power had lain dormant in Elena for years, waiting for the moment it was needed most. She found her way, half by instinct and half by desperation, to a hidden valley 3 days' journey from Cross territory. There, a coalition of exiled alpha families had built a quiet stronghold, sheltering wolves who had been cast out, betrayed, or hunted by more powerful packs. Their leader, an aging alpha named Thomas Reyes, took one look at Elena's eyes glowing faintly gold in the moonlight, and knew exactly what she was. "You carry the old blood," he told her that first night, kneeling before her without being asked. "We have waited generations for a sovereign to rise again." Elena did not understand what that meant at first. She only knew that for the first time since the rejection, she felt something other than shame. She felt purpose. Over the following months, Reyes and the coalition trained her, not just in combat, though she learned to fight harder than she ever imagined possible, but in the old ways of leadership, diplomacy, and the deep magic tied to her bloodline. Her wolf, once dismissed as too soft, too gentle, began to change. It grew steadier, sharper, more certain. Where other wolves in the valley bowed their heads when she entered a room, she learned to stand taller, to meet their gazes instead of shrinking from them. She learned that her wolf was not weak. It had simply never been allowed to become what it truly was. Word did not travel quickly between the Hidden Valley and Cross territory, but what little news reached them told a troubling story. In the months following Elena's disappearance, Damien's pack had begun to unravel. Rival packs, sensing weakness in a king who had broken his own mate bond before it was even sealed, grew bold. Skirmishes broke out along the borders. Trade alliances that had taken years to build quietly dissolved. Whispers spread from pack to pack that the Cross Alpha King had cursed his own bloodline by rejecting a true mate, and that his throne would pay the price. Inside his own walls, things were no better. Damien's closest advisor, a wolf named Victor Hale, began meeting privately with members of a rival pack, promising them information in exchange for protection should the Cross throne fall. Damien, consumed by the pressure of holding his crumbling pack together, did not notice the betrayal forming right beside him. He told himself, again and again, that he had made the right choice. A king could not afford a weak mate. He had a duty to his pack, a duty that came before his own heart. But some nights, alone in his study, he found himself staring at the door Elena had walked through, and wondering if he had mistaken fear for weakness. He had felt the bond the moment she came of age, felt it pull at him stronger than anything he had known, and he had run from it, telling himself it was for the good of the pack. Now the pack was falling apart anyway, and he had lost her for nothing. He sent trackers in every direction, but Elena Voss could not be found. He never learned that the reason his best trackers failed was not luck, but the growing strength of a bloodline more powerful than his own, shielding her from any wolf who meant her harm. 3 years passed. In the hidden valley, Elena had become someone the coalition called Alpha Queen, not because she ruled over any single pack, but because her presence alone was enough to make alphas across the region kneel without being asked. She had grown into her power fully now, her wolf golden-eyed and steady, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came not from cruelty, but from quiet, unshakable certainty. She thought of Damien less often than she once had. The wound had scarred over, though it had never fully disappeared. She had built a new life, a new purpose, surrounded by wolves who respected her for exactly who she was. And yet, when Thomas Reyes came to her one evening with troubling reports from cross territory, rumors of betrayal within Damien's inner circle, of a pack teetering on collapse, of a king who had grown thin and hollow-eyed with the weight of his failures, she felt something stir in her chest that she could not quite name. "You do not owe him anything," Reyes reminded her gently. "Whatever you decide, it will not be for his sake." Elena nodded slowly. She knew that. And yet she also understood, more clearly than she ever had, exactly what kind of power she now carried, and what it meant that a pack was crumbling because a king had refused to see a woman's true strength. It was not only Damien's mistake to fix, it was a lesson the wolves of the region needed to witness. She decided to return, not for him, but for herself, and for every wolf who had ever been told they were not enough. She chose the anniversary of her rejection. At dawn, exactly 3 years to the day since she had walked out of the great hall in silence, Elena Voss returned to cross territory, flanked by a dozen warriors from the coalition, wearing the deep crimson mark of a sovereign alpha queen across her collarbone, visible for all to see. Word spread through the packlands before she even reached the manor gates. Wolves who caught sight of her in the pale morning light felt an instinctive pull deep in their chests, an ancient recognition that made even hardened warriors lower their eyes and bow their heads without understanding why. By the time she reached the front steps of the manor, half the pack had gathered, kneeling in the frost-covered grass, drawn by a power they could not name, but could not resist either. Damien felt it before he saw her, a pull in his chest so strong it nearly brought him to his knees in his own study. He rushed to the window and saw her standing at the gates, radiant in the dawn light, no longer the uncertain young woman he had rejected, but someone else entirely, someone who made his own wolf whimper low in submission. He walked out to meet her, his advisors trailing nervously behind him, uncertain what was happening, or what it meant. Victor Hale, the advisor who had been quietly betraying him for months, slipped away into the trees the moment he saw the coalition warriors, understanding immediately that his schemes had no place in whatever was unfolding. Damien stopped a few feet from Elena, searching her face for some trace of the woman he remembered. He found her, still, somewhere beneath the new strength in her eyes, but she was different now, steadier, and he understood in that moment exactly how much he had underestimated her 3 years ago. "Elena," he said, his voice rough. "I was wrong. I have been wrong for 3 years." She studied him for a long moment before answering. "You rejected me because you believed I was too weak to stand beside you," she said, her voice calm but carrying easily across the silent crowd. "I have spent 3 years becoming someone even you cannot ignore. But I did not come back today for your forgiveness, Damien. I came back to see what has become of the pack you chose over me." Around them, the kneeling wolves listened closely, and murmurs of understanding passed through the crowd. They had all heard the stories, in one form or another, of the king who broke his own mate bond, and the pack that had suffered for it ever since. Damien lowered his head, something no one in the pack had ever seen their king do. "I let pride convince me that strength was the only thing worth valuing," he admitted. I did not see that you already carried more strength than I ever gave you credit for. I have lost allies, trust, and nearly my own throne because I could not admit that I was afraid of how much I needed you. Elena felt the old ache rise in her chest, softer now, tempered by everything she had become. She was not the same woman who had walked out of that hall 3 years ago, desperate for his approval. She no longer needed it, but she could see, clearly, that his pack was suffering, caught in the consequences of a decision made from fear rather than wisdom. She turned to face the crowd, her voice rising, so that every wolf gathered could hear her clearly. I did not return to reclaim a bond that was broken by cruelty, she said. I returned because I have learned that true strength is not about never being afraid. It is about what you do after the fear has already cost you everything that mattered. She looked back at Damien, studying him one final time. You have a choice now. Just as I once did, she said. You can continue leading a pack built on fear and pride, and watch it fall apart around you. Or you can learn, truly learn, what it means to stand beside someone as an equal, not above them. Damien met her gaze steadily, something like hope breaking through the exhaustion in his eyes. Then teach me, he said quietly, if you will still have me. The crowd held its breath, waiting. Elena did not answer him immediately. Instead, she turned toward the rising sun, feeling the warmth of dawn settle over the packlands she had once fled in shame. She thought of every lesson the past 3 years had taught her, of every moment she had grown stronger, not because someone gave her permission, but because she had refused to stay broken. Finally, she turned back to Damien, her voice steady and clear enough for the entire pack to hear. We will see, she said. Actions will decide what happens next, not words. It was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning, one built on truth instead of assumption, on strength earned rather than declared. As the sun rose fully over cross territory, the pack that had nearly fallen apart watched their king kneel, at last, before the woman he had once called too weak to be his queen. And for the first time in 3 years, Elena Voss felt something settle quietly into place inside her chest. Not because he had asked for another chance, but because she finally understood her own worth well enough to decide, on her own terms, whether he deserved one.